She hired someone to unalive her husband because she found out that he was SAing one of her sons. 36-year-old Stacy was married to 46-year-old Richard Scheck, and from the outside looking in, it seemed like they had a pretty good marriage. Richard was described as a good man, and when he first met Stacy, she had been divorced 4 times, which would make him the 5th husband. Stacy had 2 boys from a previous marriage, and Richard adopted those boys like they were his own children, and he got along pretty well with them. However, this was not good enough for Stacy because she was having an affair on Richard. Stacy worked as a head administrator at a medical office in Georgia, and this is when she would meet her side piece, who she had been having an affair with for years. During all of this, Stacy was having second thoughts of being married to Richard. Stacy came up with the idea that she was going to hire someone to unalive her husband Richard, and he also had a life insurance policy of $560,000, and she would get that. But first, she needed to find someone who was capable of doing this, so she started talking to her coworker Lenitra Ross, who was a medical assistant at the same practice. Stacy confided in Lenitra that she wanted to unalive her husband because he had been SAing one of her sons. Lenitra knew just the perfect person for this, and that was Reginald Coleman, and he was a personal trainer. Stacy paid Lenitra about $10,000 that was going to go both to her and Reginald, and they were able to stay in a home owned by Stacy rent-free. On the evening of February 14th, 2010, Richard cooked a Valentine's dinner for Stacy and her elderly grandparents. Stacy was at work when she called Richard to go ahead and meet her at a local park so they could exchange Valentine's Day gifts and cards. At this point at the park, it was nighttime, it was dark and secluded, but still Richard was waiting for Stacy, thinking they were going to have some romantic time together. But Richard had no idea that Reginald was waiting for him at the park before he had even got there. At some point while Richard was waiting for Stacy, he was shot 5 times. Reginald then called Lenitra to let her know that the deed was done, and then Stacy was called so that she could go to the park and act like she didn't know what had just happened. The cops were called, and once they arrived at the scene, they ruled out the possibility of it being a robbery because none of his valuables were taken. While investigating the scene, they noticed a 3rd set of tire tracks from an unknown car. While in search of this unknown car, Stacy's cousin had submitted a tip that Stacy had an extra car that she was supposed to sell, but randomly one day it disappeared. Investigators ended up tracking down this car, and it was parked right outside Lenitra's home. At this point, investigators were convinced that Stacy was involved in some kind of way, but they just needed more evidence. Eventually, someone from IT from Stacy's job had submitted a tip to police that they should check her emails because there was something suspicious. As they were checking through all of her emails, they eventually saw that Stacy had sent Lenitra about $10,000. They then checked Stacy's phone records, and it showed that she had contacted Reginald on the day of Richard's murder. 3 months after Valentine's Day, the police got Reginald, Lenitra, and Stacy to go in for questioning. Stacy ended up confessing that she did hire someone to unalive Richard because he had been SAing her kids. Later on in court, Stacy's son would testify that Richard never did anything to him and that Stacy was just lying. Stacy just wanted to get rid of Richard because she was scared if she divorced him that he would try to get custody of those kids. Stacy, Reginald, and Lenitra were all sentenced to life in prison without parole.
Her remains were found discarded in a landfill, miles away from the street she was last seen alive. 7-year-old Summer Thompson should have made it home that afternoon. It was October 19th, 2009, and like any other day, she walked back from Grove Park Elementary with her siblings. Nothing felt off until something small shifted. A quick argument between the siblings, and then Summer ran ahead. That decision would be the last normal moment of her life. Her siblings kept walking, expecting her to catch up like always. But when they got home, Summer wasn't there. At first, it didn't make sense, and then it didn't feel right. Within minutes, concern turned into panic because Summer never wandered off. The last confirmed sighting placed her on Gyno Avenue, sitting beneath a palm tree, crying with her hands covering her face. It's an image that feels frozen in time because what happened next remains one of the most chilling parts of this case. Someone saw her, and instead of helping, he watched. Jared Harrell was a 24-year-old neighbor who lived along the same street. To everyone else, he blended in. But investigators will later uncover something far darker beneath the surface. Something that already put him on the police's radar. And that day, he made a decision. Using something painfully simple, he lured Summer into his mother's home by asking if she wanted to pet a dog. It worked because it had worked before. There was no struggle, no screams heard outside. Just silence. Inside the house, the situation escalated quickly. Jared later admitted to sexually assaulting Summer and recording parts of the attack. When she began to scream, he claimed he tried to quiet her, but the outcome was fatal. The official cause of death was asphyxiation. And then somehow it got even worse. Instead of calling for help, Jared hid what he had done. He placed her small body into a container and drove it to a dumpster behind the restaurant where he worked. From there, it was unknowingly transported across state lines into a landfill in Georgia. For 2 days, an entire community searched in fear, wearing purple and holding on to hope. But Summer was already gone. In 2012, Jared Harrell pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, finally bringing some form of justice to a case that has shaken the nation. What did you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
These women were promised a surrogacy job but ended up being trapped on a human egg farm. In August of 2024, a woman was scrolling on Facebook when she came across a job ad promising an income of $11,000 to $17,000. She was very intrigued, so she messaged the page and they told her that it was to become a surrogate mother for couples in the country of Georgia. The woman ended up agreeing to do this job and the employer paid for her passport application and other travel expenses. She and 10 other women traveled to Georgia and were led by a Thai woman believed to be working with the human egg farm. Once those women arrived, they were taken to an area with about 4 large houses and they were met with about 100 other Thai women already living there. What these women were promised was a complete lie, and what these women would go through would be like a real-life horror movie. They were given hormones to stimulate their ovaries, and once a month they were given an anesthetic so that they could take their eggs. Their eggs were sold and trafficked to other countries for IVF, and they were never paid for any of this. The people behind all of this were Chinese gangsters, and they went by the name Egg Mafia. A woman was able to be released only because she paid the mafia about $2,000, and when she returned to Thailand, she alerted the authorities. On January 30th of this year, the Foreign Affairs Police were able to help 3 other women escape and go back to Thailand. Unfortunately, there are still many others waiting to be released.
He beat and unalived a 1-year-old baby and got no jail time. Christian Moniz Rubino sometimes took care of his girlfriend's son, 1-year-old Kai Tereso. During this time, Christian would constantly and horrifically abuse Kai. This abuse went on for months, and Kai's mother, Tatiana Tereso, would witness the abuse and continue dating her boyfriend and not do anything to help her own baby. Christian would get frustrated with Kai because Kai wasn't walking fast enough. So, Christian would slam Kai down on the floor, feet first, which ended up fracturing both of Kai's legs. Apparently, Tatiana wanted to take Kai to the hospital, but Christian convinced her not to go, so she didn't. After months of abuse, Kai suffered from severe seizures and had to be hospitalized. All the violent shaking and blunt force trauma to the head that Kai had endured from Christian caused brain bleeding. Kai passed away from Christian's abuse, and Tatiana turning a blind eye to the abuse and not doing anything to save her baby. Christian received 0 prison time for unaliving baby Kai. He only got 5 years of probation, so he's out in the world living his life right now. In my opinion, Christian and Tatiana should both be in prison forever. What do you guys think about this case?
A 16-year-old went missing in Indiana in May of 2026 and she still hasn't been found. Somebody from the town reached out to me to discuss what happened to Nevaeh McKinney. Nevaeh McKinney is 16 years old and from Kokomo, Indiana. She was reported as a runaway juvenile on May 30th, 2026. She is 5'4" and somewhere between 80 and 100 pounds with brown hair and brown eyes. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot of information out there and there's very few details in her case because she literally just disappeared and we don't even know exactly what the circumstances are behind her disappearance. They haven't put that information out there. I was able to find on Facebook, though, that she had run away in September of 2025 as well, but she was found that time. I had someone from that town reach out to me about doing her case, and they gave me a lot more details than I can really share. But I do hope that they are fully investigating her disappearance to figure out the circumstances around it. If you or anybody you know has any information regarding the disappearance of Nevaeh McKinney, you can contact the Kokomo Police. Thank you for listening to Nevaeh's story. Be sure to follow for more true crime, and if you have any case recommendations, feel free to comment, directly message me, or you can fill out the suggest a case form in my link tree in my bio.
Why are people not talking about this case? The court records are absolutely sickening, what this man did to a literal child. But the charges have now been dismissed. Why? Because he's dead. The girl's dad killed him. But it's not a total happy ending. Prepare for your blood to boil. It was the 8th of October 2024 in Arkansas in the US. 36-year-old Aaron Spencer lived at home with his wife Heather and their 13-year-old little girl along with their dog. And thank God for this dog, because to be honest, it may have saved the little girl's life. Now, the teenager was obviously vulnerable due to her age, and one local man called Michael Fossler had been keeping a very close eye on her. In July, bear in mind this man was 66 at this point, and this girl was a literal child, he was charged with some sickening offences. She'd bravely confided in a family member about what this man had done to her, and he was charged with 42 charges of internet stalking of a child, SA of a child, and computer SA images of children. And any guesses what his professional history was? He worked in law enforcement. He'd got a reputation, apparently, for preying on innocent, vulnerable women and children throughout his whole life. Now, the legal process was ongoing. Like I said, some charges had been filed, and the family were granted a no contact order. Basically, this guy wasn't allowed to go near the child. But he was shock released on bond. I feel like the justice system just loves to do absolutely anything but keep predators behind bars. This little girl had obviously been through hell and back, and her family, including her dad, were obviously very on edge. They were incredibly protective over their daughter, rightly so. They didn't want anything else to happen to her. So on the night in question, Aaron was startled by his dog suddenly barking out of the blue. He went into his daughter's bedroom to investigate, and he was alarmed to see that his daughter was not in the room. On her bed was a large stuffed animal in a hoodie. So basically to create the illusion that the daughter was still in there, somebody had placed this teddy. Aaron immediately knew this was the work of Michael. So he ran outside to his truck, he got in and he sped off looking for another vehicle. As luck would have it, he did spot Michael, and lo and behold, who was in the front seat of the car with Michael? It was his daughter. She was desperately trying to get out, but Michael was not going to stop the car. In total fight or flight and panic, Aaron felt he had no choice but to try and speed after them. And when it got clear that Michael was not going to stop the car, Aaron decided to ram them off the road. With both cars stationary, Aaron could see that his daughter was trying to get out of the vehicle. Aaron swung his door open and ran to grab Michael. A huge altercation took place, one that ended in Aaron actually taking out a gun and shooting Michael and then smacking him with the weapon. Aaron's daughter jumped out of Michael's car and into her dad's truck before Aaron called 911 to report the shooting. And Aaron totally admitted to what he'd done. He was in a state of panic and needed to save his daughter's life. Now, despite this, due to the fact that a man was obviously dead, Aaron was charged with homicide. He could potentially be given a life sentence for this. There was also something incredibly weird going on when he was arrested and put in the back of the police car. It was almost like they were trying to set him up. There was some substance paraphernalia planted in the back of the police car, which Aaron had no idea how it had got there, and luckily Aaron did spot this and kind of could tell what was going on here. He was incredibly smart, and he said, "No, do not try and frame me here for being on some sort of substances. I am not a substance user and I'm totally sober. Give me a blood test." He did just that, and he proved it, thankfully. And the sheriff who had tried to allegedly set him up was John Staley. He'd actually previously been sued by an inmate for blocking him getting medical attention that he needed. He was also sued by female inmates for SAing them. It's almost like predators want to try and protect predators for some reason. The hero father in this case is actually due to stand trial in September, and I am keeping all of my fingers crossed for him.
Imagine abusing a child so severely and still having the nerve to record it like it was completely normal. That's what happened in the case of Adrian Jones, a 7-year-old boy who should have been safe in his own home, but instead lived inside something closer to a nightmare. On paper, there were warning signs everywhere. Reports from schools, doctors, and even family members. Injuries that kept showing up. A child that was clearly not okay, often scared, withdrawn, and living in conditions no child should be in. And Adrian himself, he tried to tell people. He said he was being hurt. He described it. He asked, in his own way, for help. But nothing changed. Instead, the abuse continued behind closed doors, in a home investigators would later describe as a house of horrors. He was often isolated from others and denied basic comfort and care. Food became something unpredictable, something tied to punishment rather than safety. And fear became part of daily life. And what makes this even harder to process is that the abuse wasn't just happening in secret. It was being recorded. Cameras were being set up throughout the home, capturing his every move. Not for protection, but for control. And still, no one intervened in time. As the years went on, the conditions got worse. Adrian's world got smaller, harsher, and more controlled. A child who was already vulnerable was being pushed further into a situation no child should ever survive, let alone endure. By 2015, Adrian's life ended inside of that same home. When investigators finally uncovered what had happened, it didn't come from one single moment. It came from a buildup of ignored warnings, missed opportunities, and a system that had multiple chances to step in and didn't. And that's what makes this case stick with people. It's not just what was done to him, it's about the many times it could have been stopped. After his death, Adrian's story led to major changes in Kansas child welfare law, requiring social workers to physically see children when abuse is reported. It's a law named after him now. But sadly, laws don't undo what happened. What did you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
A woman who went missing for 12 days in Australia has just been found alive. It was the 29th of June 2025 when loved ones of Carolina Wilger last heard from her. The 26-year-old German backpacker had been last seen at a shop in Beacon, Western Australia. Despite the fact that she loved hiking and loved being active, it was incredibly strange of her to just totally go off the radar and not contact her loved ones. She would always keep in contact with her family and friends on these solo hikes. And honestly, it really wasn't looking good. I was fearing the worst. This has been all over the news. Photos of her Mitsubishi van were being circulated in a desperate attempt to try and get any answers about the missing woman. And after 10 days of no sign of her, her abandoned van was in fact found. This was pretty terrifying because she wasn't with her van. It was in a remote area of the outback, and it was clear that the van had become stuck and there had been efforts to get it unstuck basically, but it had been unsuccessful. And at this point, to the absolute horror of everybody in the community, homicide detectives were deployed. But just a day later, Carolina was found by a member of the public. She was limping by the side of the road with just one shoe on, in an absolutely fragile state apparently. But most importantly, she was alive. When emergency services got to her, they described her as having been ravaged by mosquitoes and had survived trauma. She was immediately flown by police jet to receive urgent medical treatment and has been recovering in hospital. She actually said to the press, "First and foremost, I want to express a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart, a thank you that truly comes from the depth of my soul, for all the incredible support during the search for me." She said she was deeply impressed by the courage, helpfulness and warmth that she'd been shown. She said, "Western Australia has taught me what it really means to be part of a true community. Here, humanity, solidarity and care for one another are what truly matter. In the end, that's what counts most."
She hired someone to unalive her husband because she found out that he was SAing one of her sons. 36-year-old Stacy was married to a 46-year-old Richard Scheck, and from the outside looking in, it seemed like they had a pretty good marriage. Richard was described as a good man, and when he first met Stacy, she had been divorced 4 times, which would make him the 5th husband. Stacy had 2 boys from a previous marriage, and Richard adopted those boys like they were his own children, and he got along pretty well with them. However, this was not good enough for Stacy because she was having an affair on Richard. Stacy worked as a head administrator at a medical office in Georgia, and this is when she would meet her side piece, who she had been having an affair with for years. During all of this, Stacy was having second thoughts of being married to Richard. Stacy came up with the idea that she was going to hire someone to unalive her husband Richard, and he also had a life insurance policy of $560,000, and she would get that. But first, she needed to find someone who was capable of doing this, so she started talking to her coworker Lenitra Ross, who was a medical assistant at the same practice. Stacy confided in Lenitra that she wanted to unalive her husband because he had been SAing one of her sons. Lenitra knew just the perfect person for this, and that was Reginald Coleman, and he was a personal trainer. Stacy paid Lenitra about $10,000 that was going to go both to her and Reginald, and they were able to stay in a home owned by Stacy rent-free. On the evening of February 14th, 2010, Richard cooked a Valentine's dinner for Stacy and her elderly grandparents. Stacy was at work when she called Richard to go ahead and meet her at a local park so they could exchange Valentine's Day gifts and cards. At this point at the park, it was nighttime, it was dark and secluded, but still Richard was waiting for Stacy, thinking they were going to have some romantic time together. But Richard had no idea that Reginald was waiting for him at the park before he had even got there. At some point while Richard was waiting for Stacy, he was shot 5 times. Reginald then called Lenitra to let her know that the deed was done, and then Stacy was called so that she could go to the park and act like she didn't know what had just happened. The cops were called, and once they arrived at the scene, they ruled out the possibility of it being a robbery because none of his valuables were taken. While investigating the scene, they noticed a 3rd set of tire tracks from an unknown car. While in search of this unknown car, Stacy's cousin had submitted a tip that Stacy had an extra car that she was supposed to sell, but randomly one day it disappeared. Investigators ended up tracking down this car, and it was parked right outside Lenitra's home. At this point, investigators were convinced that Stacy was involved in some kind of way, but they just needed more evidence. Eventually, someone from IT from Stacy's job had submitted a tip to police that they should check her emails because there was something suspicious. As they were checking through all of her emails, they eventually saw that Stacy had sent Lenitra about $10,000. They then checked Stacy's phone records, and it showed that she had contacted Reginald on the day of Richard's murder. 3 months after Valentine's Day, the police got Reginald, Lenitra, and Stacy to go in for questioning. Stacy ended up confessing that she did hire someone to unalive Richard because he had been SAing her kids. Later on in court, Stacy's son would testify that Richard never did anything to him and that Stacy was just lying. Stacy just wanted to get rid of Richard because she was scared if she divorced him that he would try to get custody of those kids. Stacy, Reginald, and Lenitra were all sentenced to life in prison without parole.
He had been SAing his little sister since she was a child. When he thought that she was going to tell someone, he was willing to kill to keep it a secret. Ryan Wingarden was born into a very big religious family in Holland, Michigan. Growing up, Ryan was a very troubled child. Probably the most disturbing thing was his obsession with his younger sister, Gail. Growing up, he always wanted to watch her change or get dressed, and he would always say that he wanted to play this game that involved them wearing no clothes. And then when Ryan was 12 years old and his little sister Gail was only 9, he began to SA her. And this continued for many years, even when they were both teenagers. It's now the 1980s. Ryan is in his 20s and he's not really doing much with his life. He doesn't have a job and he's just dealing substances to get by. And he did not like that his other siblings were doing better in their lives than he was, especially his little sister Gail. Gail met and really fell for this really great guy named Rick Brink. Gail and Rick married in 1986 and the two were really happy together, but Gail never told anyone about the abuse that she suffered at the hands of her own older brother. The summer of 1987, 1 year after Gail and Rick got married, the entire family went out on a boat day together, and this included Ryan. Gail was wearing a 2-piece bathing suit because she's on a boat, and it was very obvious obvious to every other person on the boat that her own brother Ryan was staring at her and her body in this bikini. It was very creepy. It made everyone else on the boat extremely uncomfortable. Gail's husband Rick noticed this and went to grab her a towel to cover her up so her own brother would stop creeping on her. The rest of the boat day was extremely awkward, and mind you, Ryan is in a serious relationship at this point with a woman named Pam. They had only been seeing each other for a few months, but Pam had an infant son from a previous relationship that Ryan was raising as his own son. We're not exactly sure what happened next, but it is believed that Ryan became paranoid that people might figure out what he did to Gail when they were kids, or that Gail might tell her husband what he did to her. It has been a handful of months since that boat day, and Ryan is fighting with all of his siblings about where their parents should live. Their parents were both having some health problems and needed to live with one of the kids. Specifically, he thought that Gail and Rick should house both of their parents. November 21st, 1987, Gail and Rick have a wonderful evening at a friend's wedding. Everyone that saw them said that they looked like they were having the best time. They were having so much fun dancing, and that they looked very happy and very in love. After the wedding, they drove back home, but they had no idea that Gail's older brother Ryan was waiting at their house for them to come home. When they arrived, Ryan immediately started fighting with them about where their parents should live. They yell at Ryan to just leave, go home, we'll talk about this tomorrow. So Ryan goes out to his car that was perfectly fine and in working condition, and he lies and says that his car is not starting. So he goes back inside the house, and Rick offers to drive Ryan home. Once Rick and Ryan are both in Rick's car, Ryan takes out a weapon and he shoots Rick twice in the head, killing him. Goes back inside the house, he finds his younger sister Gail, and he also shoots and kills her. She was only 22 years old. He then just leaves the bodies there. He goes home and he is intimate with his girlfriend Pam. The next morning, Ryan wants his girlfriend Pam and her 6-month-old son to go over to his little sister's house with him. She has no idea what happened, but inside the house, Ryan forces her, and she's holding a 6-month-old baby, to look at Rick and Gail's dead bodies. He then threatens her, if you tell anyone what I did, then I will kill you and your son. So she did not turn him in, and they kept living together. Pam did ask Ryan, why did you do this? And that's when Ryan confessed that he had been SAing Gail since they were children. Ryan also confessed to an old high school girlfriend who was still a close friend named Crystal that he murdered his little sister and his brother-in-law, but she didn't turn him in either. The next morning, when Gail and Rick never showed up for work, people were extremely worried. So it was actually Gail's mother and father that went over to check on them, and were unfortunately the ones that had to find their bodies. There really wasn't any evidence at the time or at the scene. Ryan was questioned, but his girlfriend Pam gave him an alibi, so the case quickly went cold. And Ryan just went on to live life as normal, like he never murdered his little sister and his brother-in-law. Him and Pam actually got married the following year and went on to have 3 children together. Over 20 years would go by, and then in 2011, the case was reopened and reinvestigated. The investigators had a feeling that Gail's older brother, Ryan, knew more or maybe had a hand in her and her husband's deaths. At the time of the murders, people testified that he was a creep around her, that he was always staring at her body, and at the time that Gail and Rick were murdered, Ryan was fighting with them all the time about their parents living with them. But nothing could happen at the time in 1987 because Rick's girlfriend, now wife Pam, had given him an alibi. So now, in January of 2013, 26 years after the murders, Pam was brought in for questioning again, and this time she immediately cracked and she confessed that her husband had killed them. Ryan was arrested and he pled not guilty to the double homicides, and even at the trial, he was staring at his wife and yelling at her, why are you saying this? Why are you making up all of these lies? He's on trial. He's now in his 50s. This happened when he was in his 20s, and he is proclaiming his innocence the entire time. But when he took the stand in his own defense, he did confess to SAing his sister Gail on at least 3 occasions. He only confessed it 3 times, but he would claim that it was all consensual, that Gail wanted it. And then nearly 30 years after he murdered his little sister and his brother-in-law, Ryan Wingarden was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. That same month that he was sentenced, his wife Pam divorced him. This is such an insane case. I was actually shocked that I had never heard about it before until a lot of you started requesting it in the comment sections. Please let me know all your thoughts on this case. Have you ever heard of this case before? But while you're in the comments, just please always remember to be respectful for Rick and Gail, the victims in this case. Please just remember them while you were in the comments. And while you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to be covered next. Thank you again to everyone that suggested that we cover Gail and Rick stories today. And I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
An 8-year-old boy is walking the last bit home by himself on the day of the royal wedding between Charles and Diana, but he never made it home that day. 7 months later, his partial remains were found buried in a woodland over 50 miles away from where he was last seen. 45 years on, this case is still unsolved, and recently there's been a £20,000 reward for anyone who can help to catch this little boy's killer. This is the unsolved murder of Vishal Mehrotra. Vishal was born on the 27th of September 1972 in India. In 1978, the family emigrated over to the UK from Sri Lanka. They settled in Putney in southwest London, and his father was a solicitor. He was actually later a retired magistrate. His mother had actually returned back to India after the two parents had separated, so Vishal was living with his younger sister, Mamta, and a live-in nanny who helped with the kids. He was described by people who knew him as independent and friendly, the kind of boy who already travelled alone on public transport to his school. The 29th of July 1981 was a huge day in UK history. That was the wedding between Prince Charles and Lady Diana. I don't think the streets probably have ever been this busy since. On that day in particular, the family went into central London to watch the procession. They returned to East Putney around 1:40 p.m, and Vishal's father was tired and he said that he went home to rest. The nanny then took the children shopping, but Vishal then said he was also tired and decided to walk the short remaining distance home by himself. She crossed him over the main road and let him go, but he was never seen by his family ever again. Before I continue, after mentioning this part, I just wanted to add in that every time I cover a case where perhaps a child has travelled somewhere alone, or they were walking somewhere alone, or they had went somewhere without their parents, I tend to get a lot of comments of people almost blaming the parents or saying that they shouldn't have done that. I just really wanted to highlight that, especially in the 80s, although it might sound crazy in this day and age, this was completely normal. Even my mum has told me about times in the 80s, 90s, that sort of time, where she would literally get 2 buses to visit family members in different towns. It sounds crazy to people in this day and age, but back then that was pretty standard. I just wanted to add this in just in case anyone comments that or might find that a bit strange. After that short walk home though, Vishal never returned home. By 7 p.m, he was reported missing, and there started one of the largest missing persons investigations in that era of time. That was followed by aerial searches, the River Thames being looked through, hundreds of sightings being checked, and more than 14,000 people being interviewed. There were several reports of a man wearing a khaki jacket with an Asian boy in the area near where the body would later be found, but nobody was actually identified as ever being this man. It was then sadly though on the 21st of February 1982, 2 clay pigeon shooters at Alder Copse on Durley Marsh Farm near Rogate, West Sussex discovered a human skull. They also discovered ribs and vertebrae buried about 2 feet deep in a bog. The remains had actually been uncovered and been disturbed by foxes. There was no clothing found, and forensic tests did confirm that those remains sadly belonged to Vishal. The 1983 inquest didn't come back with much information, but the coroner did say that foul play was likely, considering it was over 50 miles from where he was last seen. In the 2023 Channel 4 documentary In the Footsteps of Killers, which I watched recently, the presenter Emilia Fox, criminologist Professor David Wilson, and former detective Dr. Graham Hill decided to go over Vishal's case and re-examine it. There was a huge, new, striking piece of evidence coming from a girl named Paige. Her grandmother, who has since passed away, had been travelling home on the District line that day after visiting her daughter in hospital. She later told the family when this case had came out into the public that she saw a young Asian boy on the train who was, quote, very excited and particularly keen on his trainers, which she remembered them having a white flash on them. home. Sitting with him was a man she described as looking exactly like somebody that got called Catweasel. That nickname belonged to a man named Leslie Bailey. He was a key member of Sidney Cook's infamous Dirty Dozen paedophile gang. He was later convicted of the manslaughter of a 14-year-old boy, Jason Swift, and also other serious offences. The grandmother's description of this man matched Bailey's distinctive appearance. The documentary team actually tracked down Page for this and presented the account as a significant potential sighting in this case that had actually never been followed up properly at the time. It seems as though the police work in this case wasn't the greatest because there honestly is not much information that seems to have been followed up. Professor David Wilson, also in the documentary, pointed to evidence that Sidney Cook himself had knowledge of the West Sussex area and also the area where the body was found. Cook also had very extensive knowledge of fairgrounds and campsites used by travelling showmen. There was actually one of these sites near where his body was dumped. There's honestly not too much more evidence in this case. In the mid-1990s, the police recovered a document written in 1983 by a convicted abuser, Nicholas Douglas. It was simply titled Vishal. The document was held for years by the Sussex police without it being linked to the murder, and it only actually came to light around 2019 during another review of this case. Another potential theory in this case as to what could have happened to Vishal came out in the documentary when one of his friends was talking about their school. Now, a couple of years ago, £1 million was paid out to previous students of this school for mental, physical and sexual abuse against these students. We don't ever know if that happened to Vishal, but it's definitely a possibility. That has been pretty much everything up until now. In May of 2023, after there was continuous pressure from the family and by the BBC podcast, Sussex Police announced that they were re-examining the case, and they also apologised for previous failings, including the delayed connection to the document titled Vishal. At the time when it was looked into, the man who wrote it said that they only used Vishal's name in it because it was in the media at the time, but police didn't really take it seriously and investigate it as actually being connected to Vishal. Then just recently, on the 29th of July 2026, which is the 45th anniversary of Vishal's disappearance, Crime Stoppers offered a £20,000 reward for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of those who were responsible. Sussex Police have now launched a new investigation titled Operation Moor. Vishal's sister Mamta had said, quote, "I was only a little girl when my brother disappeared, but the impact of losing him has stayed with me every day for my life. For us, Vishal was not a headline. He was a son, a brother and a child with his whole life ahead of him. He is loved and he is still loved. If you know anything, no matter how small, please come forward." This young boy was tired and quite simply just wanted to walk home. Instead, now the only information we have is a possible sighting of him on a tube with a known predator, a document titled with his name, written by a convicted abuser, and a school where boys were being abused at the time. After 45 years, there is still no conviction and nobody being charged in this case. If you remember anything from that royal wedding day, a boy in the train, a man who looked like Catweasel, or somebody in a khaki jacket, any car near those woods where he was found, or even if something has been said to you in confidence, please contact Sussex Police on 101 quoting Operation Moor. I am so surprised I had never heard of this case. Obviously, I wasn't born at the time, but it seemed as though it was an absolutely huge case at the time that personally I just don't think has been looked into properly. There is so many kind of dodgy and strange theories circling around this case that I am so mind blown and surprised that more hasn't been done about this. The £20,000 reward is time sensitive, so if you do know anything, please come forward. Thank you all so much for being here and watching. If you do have any case suggestions, leave them down below. Look after yourself and I will see you in the next one.
She was kidnapped while she was on the phone with her fiance, and then minutes later he would pass the truck she was in and heard her screaming. What happened to Angela Hammond? Angela Marie Hammond, who went by Angie, was 20 years old and living in Clinton, Missouri in 1991. She worked at a bank and was taking classes at Central Missouri State University. She was described as outgoing and popular and was at a point in her life where she had a lot to look forward to. She was actually 4 months pregnant, and she was engaged to her fiance, Rob. On the evening of April 5th, 1991, Angie and Rob went to a barbecue together, and then around 10 p.m., Angie dropped Rob off at his parents' Rob's house as he had to watch his younger brother for a little bit. And they planned to talk on the phone later, as well as once Rob's mom got home, they were gonna meet up and hang out again. Angie would go spend time with a friend before eventually heading to downtown Clinton, where around 11:15 p.m., she would use a payphone to call Rob, and this payphone was by 2nd and Jefferson Streets, which was about 7 blocks from Rob's home. And at first, the conversation was just completely normal. But while on the phone, Angie would mention that an older model green Ford pickup truck kept circling the block, and then it made her nervous because it parked right by the payphone. Angie would describe this to be a filthy bearded man. He walked towards the phone booth and then used the phone that was directly beside Angie. And then he didn't talk to anybody. He just got back in his truck where she could see that he had a flashlight and was looking for something. So Rob thought, well, maybe he really needs to talk to somebody and the phone's not working. So just ask him. And if he needs it, we can get off the phone for now. The man would just say that he didn't need it right now. So Angie and Rob just kept talking about something else until everything changed. Rob would hear Angie scream. So he just got in his car and started driving towards the payphone because he knew he was only 7 blocks away. On the way, he would see the green Ford pickup truck that matched Angie's description. And then as he passed them, he heard someone yell Robbie, and he knows that it was Angie's voice. So he just threw his car into reverse, turned around and started chasing him. But he only made it 2 miles because when he threw his car into reverse, it damaged the transmission and his car broke down. Rob watched the truck turn and disappear into the night, and Angie was just gone. I can't even imagine what he was feeling in that moment. Investigators searched everywhere and they started looking for that truck because they pretty much knew exactly what they were looking for. Rob even saw a decal on the back of the truck of a fish jumping out of water. So it couldn't be that hard to track it down, right? The Missouri State Highway Patrol started searching for registered vehicles that matched this description, and they were able to match it to approximately 1,600 vehicles that could potentially fit the description, but they were never able to narrow it down to what truck was involved in Angie's disappearance. Rob was initially considered a suspect, but they were able to rule him out. Investigators began looking at whether Angie's case was connected to other missing women in the state. Just a few months earlier, 42-year-old Trudy Darby disappeared from the convenience store that she worked at in Max Creek. Her body was found 2 days later in a river. In February 1991, 30-year-old Cheryl Ann Kenny disappeared from the convenience store that she worked at in Nevada, Missouri. There were some similarities in the cases, but investigators were never able to establish enough evidence to fully connect them. Trudy's case would be solved, but Angie and Cheryl's case remained unsolved. But 30 years later, investigators have revealed a completely different theory. The theory revolves around mistaken identity. Police disclosed that a confidential informant who was involved in a narcotics investigation had received a threatening letter on April 4th, 1991, the exact day that Angie Hammond went missing. And this informant had a daughter named Angela who lived in Clinton and looked similar to Angie Hammond. Investigators believe someone connected to the operation intended to abduct the informant's daughter Angela, but ended up abducting Angela Hammond instead. There's been no definitive proof yet of what exactly happened though, or who took Angela. As of August 2026, Angela Marie Hammond remains missing. And this case is so bizarre. Her fiance was on the phone with her as this was happening, and even past the truck she was in. I'm sure this case just absolutely has haunted him. But if you or anybody you know has any information regarding the disappearance of Angie Hammond, you can contact the Clinton Police Department. Thank you for listening to Angie's story. Be sure to follow for more true crime, and if you have any case recommendations, feel free to comment, directly message me, or fill out the suggested case form in my link tree in my bio.
It's just like, you can't act that way and then convince me or try to convince me that you are mentally stable. You're accused of murdering your ex-boyfriend and you're doing headstands in the questioning room. You're stalking your ex-boyfriend. You're crawling through the dog door to get into his house, guys. Today we're going to be talking about Jodi Arias. Before we get into it though, hi, it's 2025. I try to be as active in the comment section as I can be. I'm sure you guys notice, like, I love chatting with you guys, and when I don't respond to comments for a couple days, I literally miss you. Like, as we speak, I'm currently missing you because I feel like I haven't talked to you because I haven't been in the comment section, but I just love you. I hope everyone had happy holidays and got awesome Christmas gifts. My boyfriend got me a puppy. We pick her up next weekend, so I'll definitely be showing pictures of her on my Instagram if you want to go see. All right, let's get into it. Travis Alexander was born in California. Life at home for Travis wasn't the best. His parents kind of neglected him and his siblings a lot, so when he was 10 years old, him and his siblings went to go live with their grandparents. Although he had a rough upbringing, Travis wasn't going to let that carry on and shape his entire life. When he grew up, he converted to Mormonism. He was very passionate about his faith. He got a job working as a salesman with prepaid legal services, and he found himself pretty satisfied and happy with the life that he had built. By the time he was 29 years old, he was living in Arizona. He bought a house. He rented 2 of the rooms out to his friends. He was working at a job that he enjoyed. He had a good social life, all was well. In September of 2006, at a job convention, Travis met his soon-to-be girlfriend, Jodi Arias, and meeting Jodi would change the trajectory of his life in the worst way possible. Jodi was born in Salinas, California, and as far as I could tell, she had a pretty normal childhood. However, there are conflicting stories about that because, how do I say this politely? Soon you will come to find out that everything that comes out of Jodi's mouth is a lie. It's most likely a lie. She's not a very big fan of honesty. That being said, she once claimed that starting around the age of 7, she suffered a lot physically and emotionally because of her parents. But on the other hand, she also said that her and her family had a very close relationship and described her life at home as almost ideal. Jodi's parents described their daughter to be a very smart girl, but in the same breath, they said that she was a very strange person. This is a quote from her mother, Sandy. Quote, "Jodi has mental problems. Jodi would freak out all the time. I had quite a few of her friends call me and tell me I needed to get her some help." It was odd because one day Jodi would be in a great mood, happy to be around her parents, and then all of a sudden she would switch and become this really mean and aggressive person. You could never really tell which side of Jodi you were going to get on whatever day. When she was in the 11th grade, her relationship with her parents got so rocky that she decided to drop out of school and move out. She left home, she moved away, she was going to try and make a life for herself by herself. In her 20s, she bounced around from job to job trying to find different ways to make money. Some of these jobs included waitressing and photography, but that really wasn't satisfying for Jodi. She wanted more, which is when she got a job as a saleswoman with prepaid legal services. 2006, she headed off to the same job convention for the same company that Travis Alexander worked for, and there in Vegas is where the two of them would meet and fall in love. The company held a dinner one night for all of their employees, and as soon as Travis and Jodi met, there was a spark. They hit it off, they spent the entire night talking, they were awake together until 4 in the morning, and Travis was so excited about this girl. The following day, he told all of his friends that Jodi Arias was someone that he could really see potential with, a girl that he could see himself marrying. And he was right, there was something there. The two of them started dating, and even though Jodi lived in California and Travis lived in Arizona, they found a way to make long distance work. They would travel together all the time. They were always on the phone, texting, FaceTiming, calling. Everything was perfect. Travis could very much see a future with this girl. He even started, again, telling his friends that this was the kind of person that he wanted to marry, but there was one issue. Because Travis was so extremely in touch with his religion, it was very important to him that because he was a Mormon, he needed to marry a Mormon woman. Travis brought that up to Jodi, and even though she was raised Catholic, she saw no problem with that at all. She immediately agreed to convert her religion to become Mormon for Travis so that the two of them could live happily ever after. So on November 26th of 2006, Travis himself baptized Jodi and she became a Mormon. Their relationship was now stronger than ever. Jodi ended up moving to Arizona to be closer to Travis, and it seemed like both of them thought this was endgame. It was gonna be them two together forever. They found the person they wanted to spend the rest of their lives with. But then Jodi's red flags started showing, and they got to be so noticeable that even Travis himself could not ignore them. Jodi started showing an obsession with Travis that was so strong that it became alarming. She demanded to know everything he was doing at all times, who he was with. She would read his email. She would eavesdrop on eavesdrop, is that correct? She would listen in on conversations with him and other people. She would wait outside of the bathroom for him to come out because she refused to leave his side. It was like she genuinely thought that she deserved to know everything about him and control everything that he did. And Travis's friends noticed and referred to her behavior as disturbing. Because of that, Travis became somewhat distant. He wasn't sure if this is what he wanted anymore. Actually, it got to a point where he knew that this was not what he wanted anymore. It was too toxic. He didn't want to be with Jodi. He called off the relationship and he started seeing other people. And I'm sure you could have guessed, but this would just make things worse. When Jodi would learn about a new person that Travis was seeing, she would go ballistic. She would find his dates on social media and attack them, harass them. She once slashed the tires of his cars and of the girl's car who he was seeing at the time. Jodi would show up to his house uninvited, and when she couldn't get inside because the doors were locked, she would crawl in through the doggy door. Jodi? Get up off the floor, first of all. Second of all, leave the man alone. No, guys, literally imagine you have a psycho ex and then all of a sudden you turn around, they're crawling into your house through the doggy door. I don't know if I would laugh or cry, probably both. Needless to say, her behavior turned from uncomfortable to creepy to concerning very quickly. Travis once told his friends that he was afraid of the lengths that Jodi would go to get what she wanted. He told his friends to not be surprised if one day they just found him deceased. On June 9th of 2008, Travis's friends had failed to get a hold of him for 5 days. Travis was supposed to go on a trip to Mexico with one of his friends that he had planned, but the day before they were supposed to leave, the friends still had not heard of him, so she went over to his house, and his roommates also said they hadn't heard from him for around 5 days. The roommates actually thought that Travis was already in Mexico, which is why they weren't super concerned when they hadn't spoken to him, but now realizing altogether that none of them had heard from him, they were terrified, sick to their stomachs. They went to go try and open his door, but the bedroom door was locked, so his roommate got a spare key, and when they opened the door, they found the most horrific sight. There was blood everywhere. It did not take long for them to find Travis's body. It was in the shower, no longer alive. 30-year-old Travis Alexander had been attacked with a sharp weapon 27 times all over his body. He had a massive slash from ear to ear and through his throat, and he also had a wound to the head. His injuries were so bad, it was so hard for them to pinpoint exactly which one was the cause of death, but one thing they knew for sure, that this was a homicide. It was horrific. His friends called 911 immediately. The operator asked where the blood was coming from, and his friends responded that they couldn't even tell because there was so much of it all over. The operator then asked if there was anyone in Travis's life that would want to bring harm to him, someone that would hurt him in that way with so much clear anger and passion, to which his friends responded, yes, actually his psycho ex-girlfriend. They told the operator he had been threatened in the past, and they gave them the name Jodi Arias. When investigators got there, they taped off the room as a crime scene, and they removed Travis's body. They also found long brown hairs, a digital camera in the washing machine, and a bloody handprint on the wall. Police knew they had to find and get a hold of Jodi Arias immediately, and they thought that it might be hard to find her, but it wasn't, because Jodi actually called them herself and offered to do anything that she could to help. Now, this is when we get into Jodi's web of lies. There are literally way too many for me to cover. I will just go over some. At first, Jodi claimed that she hadn't seen Travis in 2 months since she moved back to California. However, the digital camera that was found in the washing machine, obviously someone put the camera in there thinking that they would ruin the camera, and the camera was ruined, but the memory card still worked. And in the memory card, investigators found intimate photos of Travis and Jodi's from the day that he was killed, as well as a picture of his deceased body. The bloody handprint at the scene of the crime also had both Jodi's DNA and Travis's DNA, and back to the wound that Travis had on his head. Obviously, a weapon had been used there, and investigators connected the dots and came to realize that on May 28th, prior to the murder, Jodi's grandparents had called the police to report that a weapon of theirs was stolen. And if you didn't pay much attention to the scene, you would think that maybe the house got robbed, but upon investigating further, it was obvious that the house wasn't robbed. It looked like it was a staged robbery, but the only thing that was taken was the weapon. No other money, no valuables, nothing, just the weapon, almost as if someone took it on purpose for a specific reason. Almost as if Jodi took it to end the life of her ex-boyfriend. Everything pointed to Jodi being responsible for his death, and when she started to realize that she wouldn't be able to deny that, instead of pretending any longer that she had a true real alibi, she changed her story and said that she actually was with Travis at his house the night of the murder, but she said that she didn't do it. She said that there were 2 intruders that broke into the house, attacked them both, instructed her to be quiet as they ended Travis's life, and Jodi claimed they left her unharmed and then just left the house. Like, her stories don't even make sense, and her behavior during the questionings make even less sense. Also, seeing her talk is just so creepy because it's almost as if there's no life behind her eyes. Like, the things that she says so casually are honestly terrifying to me. In an interrogation room, when Jodi was left alone, she started talking to herself, singing songs, singing to herself, doing headstands. It's the weirdest thing. Jodi Arias was arrested and charged with the murder of Travis Alexander. In court, in trial, she continued to lie and change her story. I don't know how she didn't run out of stories to tell. Jodi testified herself in court, in trial, for 8 days. She was on the stand for 8 days, consistently making up new stories, talking crazy. Finally, she did admit to ending his life, but she claimed that it was in self-defense. The jury ultimately found Jodi guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I'm pretty sure so far she has been the worst prisoner. She continues to cause problems and just keeps lying and they're like, she needs help. Yeah, she's a little bit psycho. Let me know what your thoughts are on this case. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. And I will say this again, we don't know what's going to happen with TikTok, but if it does get banned, I will start posting these videos on Instagram. So go make sure that you're following me on Instagram. It is linked in my bio. Love you so much. I hope you're having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
He left his home in the middle of the night in the early hours of his birthday with no phone, no money, no ID, no note, and not telling anyone where he was going. Hundreds of miles away 7 days later, his car turned up abandoned by a remote Scottish loch. Inside, he had purchased 2 of every item that he had. There was also an empty cardboard box that once held a bottle of whiskey, but the bottle was gone and so was he. This is the disappearance of Stephen Cooper. I found this case through the podcast The Missing a couple of months ago, and ever since I have fell down a rabbit hole about it. I don't understand any of the circumstances that has happened in this disappearance, and I don't think you will either. Stephen Frank Cooper was born on the 21st of January 1961. He lived in Golcar near Huddersfield in West Yorkshire. Stephen had done a lot with his life. He was a Territorial Army soldier and he was a very skilled carpenter. His sister said on the podcast The Missing that he loved to do little odd jobs for people and would never accept payment. He would always say to them, just buy me a pint next time you see me, and I absolutely love people like that, so I just had to include that. He also had a son called Nathan from a previous marriage, and at the time of his disappearance he was living with his long-term partner Claire. Stephen actually lived with Marfan syndrome, which I had never heard of until I came across this case. It's essentially a rare genetic condition affecting the body's connective tissue. It can impact the heart, skeleton, eyes and mobility. Despite all of the challenges he faced with this though, he just lived your average regular life. He liked to spend his time down the local social club playing cards and having a drink. He would also just help anybody out with any little carpentry jobs that they had. Important thing that we will come back to in this case, those who knew him said that he did have a love for Scotland and had previously visited the Highlands before. But we'll come back to this. In the very early hours of the night on the 21st of January 2008, which would have been Stephen's 47th birthday, he left his home that day that he shared with Claire. The two had actually been out to the local social club playing cards and having a drink to celebrate his birthday the night before. According to his sister Trish when she spoke on the Missing podcast, Stephen went into the bedroom that he shared with Claire just before 3:40 in the morning to get a packet of tobacco. Claire then said that she heard the dogs barking and realised that Stephen had left. It was 3:40 in the morning and it was very heavy rain outside. He took close to nothing. He left his phone in the house. He didn't take any ID like a licence or a passport, no bank cards and no change of clothes. He had withdrawn £250 from his bank account a couple of days before. Some of this was spent at the social club and some of this was spent buying supplies for a party they were going to have for his birthday. It's important to note that he left behind £100 in cash and didn't leave any note to say where he was going. His blue Ford Focus that had just over half a tank of petrol was also gone. He had taken it, but this detail is very important. The drive from Huddersfield to the area that the car was found in Loch Laggan is between 300 and 400 miles. Everybody that's looked at this has said there is simply no way that the car could have made it that far of a journey with only half of a tank without having to stop to refuel at least once. But Stephen had left his bank cards at home and the cash that was sitting in the house kind of equated to what he would have already spent from the money that he had withdrawn. I hope I'm making sense here. His bank accounts were never used and he was never picked up on CCTV filling up the car, so how did he get there? By the mid-morning, he was in Greenock on Scotland's west coast. At 9:48am, a receipt that was found in the car was generated at Morrison's supermarket. This is where it gets strange. It listed 2 bottles of soft drink, 2 muffins and 2 pre-packaged sandwiches. I'm going to assume that they were meal deals. And also 1 bottle of Morrison's Black Label whiskey. One thing his sister noted in the Missing podcast was that Stephen didn't like to drink cheaper alcohols. For example, if you're in a pub, you will most likely be served Glens unless you ask for Smirnoff. He would always ask for Smirnoff, which begs the question, why did he go for the Morrison's own brand whiskey? How did he pay for the fuel that he definitely needed if he left his money in the house? How did he pay for the shopping in Greenock? Why did he buy 2 of everything? Was he just really hungry or was somebody else with him? A full week after his disappearance on Sunday the 27th of January 2008, Stephen's blue Ford Focus was found on a dirt track parked up off the A86 near the village of Moy, close to Loch Laggan. His location was very remote and the car was partially hidden from the main road on that dirt track. There was a gate to get to this dirt track and the lock on the gate had been broken. Inside the vehicle, that is where investigators found the wrappers and the packaging that matched the Morrison's receipt. Almost 2 of everything he'd bought in those, I'm assuming, meal deals, and the empty cardboard box from the whiskey, but not the bottle of whiskey. Stephen's sister and his family have said that they've never been able to get their heads around the fact that there was 2 of have everything? And also, how did he purchase it if he left with no money? Stephen had no strong links or even any known links to that area that the car was abandoned. Apart from the fact he had a general fondness and a like for Scotland, he knew nobody there. Police and Mountain Rescue launched a massive search around 50 square miles. They used RAF helicopters, search dogs and ground teams to search the shoreline of Loch Laggan and all the surrounding hills, but absolutely no trace of Stephen was ever found. The formal search for Stephen was called off in February of 2008. However, in 2011, after the family continued to put pressure on authorities, divers and specialist sonar teams searched the loch itself, but again, there was nothing. There was no clothing, no remains, no personal items, and no confirmed sightings of Stephen after he left that house, apart from the receipt. But is that really a confirmed sighting? Stephen's sister Trish has been one of the loudest voices when it comes to looking for her brother. She has never given up. In the episode of The Missing that I spoke about earlier, she has described this as just completely out of character and totally bizarre for Stephen to do something like this. I think any theory in this case could be possible. It's honestly so strange. A lot of people believe that Stephen went up there to take his own life, but his sister has said that she doesn't really believe this, because why would he go and buy food to get himself up there if he was just going to take his own life? But then again, if somebody was in that headspace, we don't know. His family refused to give up hope, and they refused to accept that Stephen is dead. They have continued to appeal to the public, and the charity Missing People have also done age-progressed images of Stephen, so I will put them in here if I can find them. In 2016 though, Stephen's partner Claire applied to the High Court under the Presumption of Death Act. A judge ruled that Stephen should be presumed dead so that practical matters like the family home and his estate could be dealt with. His whole family actually opposed the application and were not happy that this went through. They still believed though that Stephen was alive and there was still hope, but the court granted this against the family's wishes. More than 18 years later, Stephen Cooper has never been found. Police Scotland have said that their case still remains open, and officers said it will stay open no matter how long it takes, they said. Stephen is classed as a high-risk missing person because of his medical conditions. He was 6'2", slim, with short thin and blonde hair and bluey-green eyes. He had tattoos, a Yorkshire rose on one arm and a dragon on the other. The key things in this case that just completely blow my mind are, how did a man who left with absolutely nothing and didn't use his card pay for the fuel and pay for the things that were found in the car? Why was there two of almost every item? And what led Stephen to leave his house that night? And also the biggest question, how did his car end up at Loch Laggan? If you were in that Greenock Morrison's on the 21st of January 2008, if you saw a blue Ford Focus or a tall man with a very distinctive voice near Loch Laggan that week, or if you have any information, no matter how small you might think it is, please contact the charity Missing People on 116 000. Calls and texts are free and confidential. You can also report any information anonymously to Police Scotland on 101. Stephen Cooper left his home on his birthday that day and has never been seen again. Someone somewhere may hold the tiny piece of information that might explain exactly what happened. Thank you all so much for being here. Any case suggestions, please leave them down below. Look after yourself, and I will see you in the next one.